Under the gray, overcast sky of a late afternoon, Rob and Vicky Graves stood silently before the rusty iron gates of Fox Hollow Farm. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it whispers like warnings from an unseen world. They had left behind the hustle and bustle of the city, longing for a peaceful place to raise their 2 teenage sons. The house before them, with its pristine white walls and windows glistening in the sunset, seemed like the answer to all their dreams. But something felt wrong. The price of the house was oddly low, almost too good to be true for such a grand estate, meticulously cared for. "There must be something wrong," Vicky whispered, her eyes glancing at the rows of blooming red roses by the walkway, as if they were hiding a terrible secret. They didn't have to wait long for an answer. In the spacious living room, among thick shag rugs and the scent of freshly polished wood, the real estate agent forced a strained smile. "You've surely heard about the history of this place?" she said, her voice trembling, as though afraid to awaken something still sleeping within the walls. Rob felt a chill crawl down his spine. A vague memory surfaced. A long-forgotten news report, the announcer's voice shaking as he uttered the name Fox Hollow Farm. Herb Baumeister, the serial killer who had turned this land into his secret graveyard in the 1990s. Bodies were discovered, buried deep in the soil, forgotten beneath the trees where the Graves family now stood. "The house has been completely renovated," the agent quickly added, as if a fresh coat of paint and new hardwood floors could erase the blood that had seeped into the ground. "There's no trace of that anymore. But darkness isn't so easily wiped away. This house, for all its beauty, bore a stain that could not be cleansed. No one wanted to live here. People whispered about footsteps in the night, figures moving through the halls uninvited. The low price was the cost of isolation, not from the outside world, but from the peace within one's own soul." Rob and Vicky looked at each other, hearts pounding. They knew. They could feel it. But the dream of a new life, of peaceful days with their children, clouded their judgment. "We'll make this place our own," Rob said, his voice firm but edged with unease. Vicky nodded, clutching her husband's hand tightly, as if trying to hold on to the last bit of courage slipping away. Just weeks later, a moving truck rumbled down the narrow path leading to Fox Hollow Farm. Boxes were unpacked. Children's laughter echoed as the boys ran through the wide garden. The house seemed to welcome them, with sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of Vicky's baking from the kitchen. But the joy didn't last. The boys, with muddy feet from their outdoor adventures, left dirty trails across the floor. Vicky, vacuum in hand, began cleaning. The machine roared, then suddenly stopped. She checked the cord, still securely plugged in. She plugged it back in and resumed, but her eyes grew wary. The vacuum stopped again. This time she hadn't touched the cord. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She looked around. The room was still bright, but the air felt heavier, as if someone was watching from a hidden corner. And then, to her horror, the cord slowly slid out of the socket, as though pulled by an invisible hand. A soft click echoed, and the house fell into silence. Fox Hollow Farm, though dressed in a new facade, was still whispering its past, and it had no intention of letting this family forget. The darkness at Fox Hollow Farm didn't just lurk in the hidden corners of the house. It prowled in the minds of those who stepped onto the land. Joe, a dedicated yet perpetually late employee at Rob's car dealership, was unexpectedly offered a tempting proposition: to rent the isolated guest house on the property. With a daily commute of over an hour, Joe saw the opportunity as a much-needed escape. But the moment he set his suitcase down on the cold wooden floor, a wave of unease washed over him, as if the very air was tightening around his chest. Fred, Joe's loyal dog, grew restless. Ears perked, eyes locked onto an empty corner of the room. On his first night, Joe drifted into sleep in the unfamiliar room, only to be pulled into a harrowing nightmare. He found himself running through the endless hallways of Fox Hollow Farm, chased by an unseen entity, its growls echoing in the darkness. The dream was so intense that Joe began to sleepwalk, something he had never done before. In a panic, he crashed into a doorway, shattering a nearby glass. Shards sliced into his hand, blood spilling, and the pain finally jolted him awake. Sitting on the floor, breathing heavily, Joe looked around. Fred whimpered, his eyes fixed on the door, as though he could see something Joe could not. In the days that followed, the sense of dread thickened. One afternoon, while Rob and Vicky were repainting the exterior wall of the main house, Vicky suddenly froze. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a man in a red shirt, standing still at the edge of the woods, his gaze cold and unblinking. As she moved toward him, the figure backed away, then vanished, like mist evaporating into the trees. They searched the property, but found no footprints, no sound, nothing. They told themselves it was just a trespasser, but Vicky's heart pounded with a deeper fear, a sense that something unnatural had crossed into their world. That night, in the guest house, Joe was washing dishes, when a sudden burst of knocks hit the front door. Loud, frantic, aggressive. "Just a sec," he called out, drying his hands. But the pounding intensified, as if someone was beating the door with desperate rage. He opened it, heart thudding, but saw only the quiet darkness beyond. No one. He stepped outside, checked the roof, the bushes, nothing. Back inside the kitchen, a chill ran down his spine. A man was standing in the bedroom doorway, his empty eyes staring directly at Joe. Fred growled, fur bristling. Joe lunged to turn on the lights, but the room was empty. He searched the entire guest house, his heart racing like a drumbeat, but there was no trace of the intruder. Trying to calm down, he decided to take Fred for a walk. But that night, Fox Hollow Farm was no longer a refuge. In the shadows beneath the trees, the red-shirt figure appeared again, and for the first time ever, Fred disobeyed his master. He bolted into the woods, chasing something Joe couldn't bring himself to face. When Joe finally caught up, Fred was lying low, trembling, as if staring into the eyes of something beyond comprehension. Joe turned, and there, just a few steps away, stood the man in the red shirt, his face twisted. His eyes pierced Joe's very soul. Joe ran. Fred followed, and the guest house became a cage, a place where darkness never sleeps. Fox Hollow Farm did not spare those who touched its darkness. After the terrifying nights, Joe, Rob, and Vicky could no longer deny the truth. They were living among trapped spirits, or worse, a malevolent force taking the shape of Herb Baumeister himself. One morning, as Joe took Fred for a walk under the bright daylight to shake off his fear, he stopped by the trail near the tree line, the very place where both he and Vicky had seen the man in the red shirt. There, beneath a thin layer of fallen leaves, a bone, pale and stark, emerged, as if placed there deliberately for him to find. Joe's heart pounded. How could a human bone still remain after so many investigations? He quickly called Rob and Vicky. Together they agreed. This could be the remains of one of the victims, perhaps even the man in the red shirt. They contacted the detective who had led the Baumeister case, sending the bone, later confirmed to be a human femur, for analysis. The detective arrived, recounting the blood-chilling story of the bodies buried on the land, yet unable to explain why the earth itself still seemed to groan. Despite his fear, Joe tried to return to the guest house. One night, while checking emails, he heard a metallic scraping sound coming from the kitchen. He found every knife from the knife block neatly laid out in the sink, each one spaced evenly, as if part of some dark ritual. Nearby, deep gouges had been freshly carved into the wooden countertop. Shaking, Joe pulled out his phone, started recording, and spoke into the air. "Who's here? What do you want?" Fred, usually calm, began to growl, his eyes fixed on empty space. When Joe played back the recording, his blood ran cold. A faint, distorted voice whispered, "The man who had a wife." All of Baumeister's victims had been young, single men. Only one man involved in the story had a wife. Baumeister himself. Was the killer now trapped within the very hell he had created? The Graves family and Joe dug deeper into the case, uncovering a photograph of one of the victims. A young man in a white, drenched shirt, matching the apparition Joe had seen. They came to believe that the violent deaths had bound the victims' spirits to the land, replaying their final moments in an endless, tormenting loop. Joe could no longer stay in the guest house. Rob and Vicky took him into the main house, where they banded together, researching and seeking ways to fight back. But Fox Hollow Farm would not be conquered so easily. Eventually, the relentless pressure from the hauntings and the horrific history forced the Graves family to sell the property. It changed owners multiple times, yet its reputation for terror never faded. Investigations continued, with human remains still being discovered. The most recent in 2022, an independent film, The Haunting of Fox Hollow Farm, and a book by Robert Graves and Richard Estep chronicled the horrors that plagued the estate. To this day, it remains one of the most haunted locations in Indiana, where the souls of the victims, and perhaps Baumeister himself, remain imprisoned in eternal suffering. The questions about the supernatural, Whether a murderer can open a dark gateway, or if brutal deaths can forever scar a place, still hang unanswered. Only one thing is certain. Fox Hollow Farm stands as a chilling reminder that once darkness is unleashed, it never truly leaves.